Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back in lecture number 24. Today we are going to discuss the second part of our previous lecture that was about risks underlying Islamic modes of financing. And let me remind you, what did we study in our previous lecture? We learned the concept of risk and what are the objectives of risk management. Also we discussed the classifications of risk, different types of risk like business and financial risk, and also systematic and unsystematic risk. And we saw that systematic risks, they were in the environment, in the economy, and they are not controllable by individuals, by the firms, or by the organizations. They are prevailing in the economy and nobody can manage those risks. For example, the change in the economic situation of the world, or the rules and regulations by the government, or the exchange rate movements. So these things, nobody can control them. But there are certain risks which can be managed and they can be controlled. For example, the operations of the firm, the risks can be controlled with that. Maybe the example we studied, that a strike of the employees can be avoided by negotiation. And also we discussed the classification of risks and risks faced by the financial institutions regarding their operations, the credit risk, the liquidity risk, and different types of risk we discuss in that slide. And also the Islamic banking model, how the Islamic bank's balance sheet is different from the conventional bank's balance sheet. And for the Islamic banks, the nature of transaction is different. The depositors, they are the investors, and sometimes the deposits, the capital provided by the depositors has some restrictions on it. For example, the deposits can only be invested for equity purpose, to invest into the stock markets only, and sometimes to engage into some other activities like maybe ijara activities or maybe mudarba or musharka activities. And there may be some deposits which don't have any restriction on them. And then there are savings and profit and loss sharing accounts, and in that case the relationship of the bank and the depositors is the first tier mudarba, because bank is the manager and the depositors are the capital providers. So the relationship is a kind of partnership, which is the Rabbul Mal provides 100% of capital and the manager manages that capital. So here the relationship is known as mudarba. And in case of demand deposits, we call them as Qarz-e Hasana, that those deposits, they don't claim any return on it, but they can be withdrawn at any time. So they are only our Qarz-e Hasana. So these are the liabilities of a bank. But when the bank invests these funds, when the bank uses that capital to purchase any asset, and then there are assets which have fixed income, and then there are assets which have variable income. So for the fixed income assets, we have murabaha, we have ijara, we have salam and istisna mode of financing, because when we use this type of mode of financing, we purchase assets, and with the leasing of that asset, or maybe with the resale of that asset, we earn profits and we share it with our depositors. And on the other hand, if the nature of the asset is such that it is invested into musharka or mudarba contracts, that is a participatory modes where the assets, they generate returns, a variable return. Sometimes the business can have more profits, and sometimes the business can have lesser profits or even losses. So here, this type of assets which are invested into musharka and mudarba, the returns are variable. And then we discuss the uniqueness of the Islamic bank's risk. For example, the risk is unique in case of Islamic banks when we say when we discuss any of its mode of financing. Suppose in case of murabha, an asset is purchased, bank becomes the owner of that asset, so the risk is the market risk. Now the bank has to dispose of that asset if the buyer doesn't purchase that asset according to the agreement. So in that case, market risk is there. And when the buyer purchases that asset, when the client purchases that asset, so now the dues are to be received. Now the client has to pay the installments. So in that case, there is a credit risk, and the risk changes its nature from market to credit, and maybe from credit to market risk. In today's lecture, we will continue with the same heading, that is the risk in the Islamic financial instruments. Now, what are the instruments? These are the Islamic modes of financing which we have already studied. That those modes like Musharaka, Mudarba, and these are the modes which we are going to study here, and we are going to discuss them to determine what risks are underlying in these type of instruments. And to understand the risk in Islamic financial instruments, we look at the risk at various stages of the transaction, beginning, during, and at the conclusion of that transaction. And then we classify the risk as credit risk and market risk according to the possession time, maybe at the spot or in future. So the nature of possession may be different, maybe at the spot or in future, and it will determine the risk is a credit risk or a market risk. And then liquidity of asset or wealth, then the assets and the cash, these are, we will classify them. If there is kind of cash which is due, then maybe a credit risk. If we receive the cash, then maybe there is no risk. So we can see here the risk with the type of wealth has different kind of nature. So you see the wealth type, if it is cash, so when it is a spot payment, when the bank purchased an asset and sold it in the market and spot payment is received, there is no risk. And when the payment is going to be received in future, when the cash is going to be received in future, like in case of Murabha, where asset is delivered at the spot and the payment is deferred and the cash will be received in future, so there is a credit risk. And when the asset is any tangible asset, it may be any plant, equipment, or car, or any type of asset. So in that case, if the bank is possessing that asset at any particular time period, then the bank has the market risk, because the bank has to get rid of that asset, has to earn some profits on that asset by reselling it or by renting it. And then when that asset is sold, there is a credit risk. If it is sold on installments, or in case of Murabha, then there is a credit risk. And if it is forwarded in case of Ijara, and bank remains the owner of that asset throughout the Ijara period, so market risk is always there. So when at the end of the Ijara contract, that asset is disposed of, it is either gifted to the lessee or it is sold in the market or to the lessee. So in that case, the cash is received and then there is no risk. So in this lecture, we will discuss the Murabha mode of financing in greater detail, and also the risk associated in more detail. And the financial institution buys and sell the goods for the client at a markup. So as you know all, that in case of Murabha financing, a client approaches the bank and asks for financing to purchase an asset. So the bank purchases the asset and then it is sold to the client. So there are three parties, as we have studied in this contract, that there is a vendor, there is a bank, and there is the client. So they have three types of relationship, and all these three types of relationship we have discussed them in the Murabha lecture, and there are different phases of the transaction. Sometimes the bank appoints the client as an agent, and in its agency capacity, client purchases the asset from the vendor on behalf of the bank, and bank, which is an Islamic financial institution, becomes owner of that asset, and then that asset is sold to the client. And there are certain documentation and promises involved at different phases. So we will have different levels of risk at different intervals of this, at different phases of this kind of contract. So here To become a seller of the asset, bank must purchase and must become the owner and must possess the asset which is the subject matter of this contract. And the profit rate and other terms should be clearly specified in the contract. In case of murabha, the cost plus any expenses, it may be freight or it may be any legal fee or it may be any agency cost, plus the profit which we call as markup for the bank. These make the price for the client, and all this postmortem must be clear and it must be known to the client. Client must know that bank purchased the asset for this price and there was such and such transportation cost, this was a legal fee, and this is the profit of the bank. When all these costs, when this breakup is known to the client, this transaction is known as murabha. And when this breakup is not known to the client, this is musawama, which we are not going to discuss in this course. And the bank can ask for guarantees or collateral. So in this transaction, bank would require some guarantees, and maybe the subject matter can also be used as a guarantee or a security in such transactions. So if we look at the risk profile of a murabha transaction, we can see that with the nature of the contract, in the beginning, during the transaction, and at the end, risk will change. And let's see how goes the risk profile of a murabha financing. So in case of murabha, which is non-binding, we say it non-binding. It means that when the client requests the bank to purchase an asset for the client, so in that case, bank purchases the asset. In that case, bank purchases the asset for the client without getting any promise from the client that client will purchase or client shall purchase that asset. So here, there is no binding on the client that the client must purchase the asset. So this is known as non-binding murabha. So here in the beginning, Islamic financial institution purchases the asset where the delivery is not ensured. The client, it is not sure that client will take the delivery of the asset or not. So there is a market risk in the beginning. And when the client takes the delivery of that asset as per their agreement, so then the price is due and the client will make the payment in installments. So there is a credit risk. So there is a risk that client may not pay the remaining installments. And at the end, when the payment has been received, cash is received, so in that case, there is no risk. And in case of binding murabha, where there is a promise by the client that when the bank purchases the asset, client will take the delivery of that asset. So here, Islamic financial institution purchases the asset and delivery of the asset is ensured. So there is no risk at the beginning. And when the asset is delivered to the client, so again the price is due, so there is a credit risk. And at the end, when the cash is received by the Islamic financial institution, there is no risk at all. So we can see here that in the beginning there is a market risk. During the time period of that contract, there is a credit risk. That client at any stage may become unable to pay the remaining balance. So here we have the credit risk, and at the end, if everything goes well and the client makes the 100% payments, so there is no risk at all. So you see, the risks, they change their nature at different stages. In the beginning, market risk, then credit risk, and then if everything goes well, there is no risk. And what will be the risk profile in case of ijara and ijara wa iqtina? What you might see this new phenomena here, new terminology. Ijara wa iqtina actually means that after the lease period finishes, after the ijara contract finishes, at that time that asset is sold to the client or it is gifted to the client. That is known as ijara wa iqtina. So this is quite simpler term than the one we discussed in the ijara lecture. That was ijara muntahiya bit tamlik. That is the ijara agreement when it finishes in an ownership of the client, that is known as ijara in muntahiya bit tamlik. So that might have different arrangement, that is the asset may be gifted to the client or asset may be sold to the client. So that means the asset will end up in the ownership of the client. So in case of ijara, let me remind you few of the conditions of ijara. A leasing contract involving sale of usufruct of durable assets or goods. So the usufruct of durable assets. The consumable assets, they don't qualify to become an ijara asset, and at the same time the stocks of a firm, they also not qualify an ijara asset. So only the assets which can be used beneficially, they can become the asset which is a subject matter of ijara. So the ownership of the asset is not transferred to the lessee. So during this contract period, the lessor remains the owner of the asset, and the maintenance cost can be paid by the lessee if included in the contract, but cost of total damage of asset is borne by the owner. So all the maintenance cost, all the damages, they are the responsibility of the lessor, but if it is mentioned into the contract that lessee will maintain the asset and the cost will be reimbursed by the lessor, so in that case lessee can also become responsible for maintenance. And a hire purchase leasing contract, ownership is transferred to the lessee at the end of the contract period. So it's just like a hire and purchase contract where at the end ownership is transferred to the client. And there are some objections by scholars that what is difference between a hire purchase contract and a lease contract and the ijara contract in case of Islamic mode of financing. That in case of hire purchase, there are two contracts at the same time, that there is hiring expense being paid by the client and the client also purchases the units of the same asset in the regular intervals. So here again we have two contracts for the same asset. So there are objections raised by the scholars. Two contracts in one purchase contract cannot be binding. It doesn't qualify to become a valid contract according to some of the scholars, but this is being practiced by the Islamic financial institutions. And banks give away the asset at nominal value or as a gift at the end of the lease period. And as we discussed earlier, asset is disposed of in the form of a gift for the client, or it may be sold at its nominal value or the salvage value at the end of the contract. And what is the risk profile in case of ijara and ijara wa iqtina? So don't get confused with the word ijara wa iqtina. Ijara is a contract where the lessor remains the owner even after the expiry of the lease agreement. But in case of ijara wa iqtina, the lessee becomes the owner of the subject matter of that asset at the end of the ijara contract. And when we see the risks for ijara and ijara wa iqtina, in case of ijara, Islamic financial institution enters into a lease agreement or ijara agreement with the client and purchase the asset for the client to lease it to the client. So Islamic financial institution purchases the asset. Now the becoming owner of the asset, financial institution has the market risk. Now when the asset is transferred to the client for the usage of the usufruct, and as a reward the bank is going to receive the rental amounts. So here those receipts are due from the client and there is a credit risk. And at the end of this contract, again the asset is returned back to the lessor, which is the owner of the asset. So again there is a market risk. So the asset may not be sold at its original value, or maybe there is a huge decline in the market value of that particular asset. So there is a risk of loss again. So the market risk is there again. In case of ijara wa iqtina, which is a substitute word for the ijara muntahiya with tamlik, in the beginning, Islamic financial institution on the request of the client purchases the asset. So becoming the owner, bank assumes the market risk. And when the asset is delivered to the client, there is a credit risk, that is the rental amounts are due from the client and there is a credit risk. At any time during the contract, the client may go default or may not be able to pay the installments at the regular time periods. And when the asset is transferred at the end, now at the end of this contract, asset is transferred to the client. Now the ownership is transferred to the client, so the market risk is now no more there for the bank. So there is no risk in this case. Now the Salam mode of financing. So before we go to the risk profile of Salam mode, let me remind you what are different characteristics of a Salam. It is a contract where the asset is purchased for a future delivery of the asset. Normally, what happens is that asset is purchased and payment is deferred. But this is a reversal for that. Payment is made in advance and the delivery of the asset is delayed. So a pre-production sale of the goods, mostly it is practiced in the agriculture sector, and the selling of good in advance and used to finance the agriculture sector. So in agriculture sector, it is normally practiced that from the farmers, before they can harvest their crops, the banks or the Islamic financial institution purchase those crops. And the price has to be fixed and paid at the spot. So here, the Islamic banks, they purchase those commodities, those crops which are still to be grown at a price which is lower than the market price. So when the bank, they will receive the delivery of those commodities, the bank can sell those goods into the market and can earn the profits with the price difference. And the delivery time is deferred and should be fixed. So in case of Salam, the delivery time must be fixed. Maybe it involves some time period. For example, in case of crops which need more time like rice and wheat, there might be a time period of 6 months, but a particular date will be announced. A time will be fixed. Then a parallel Salam mechanism is also available to the bank. When the bank enters into a Salam contract with the seller, with the client, and then the bank has committed its investment into a purchase which will be received after some time period. So in the meanwhile, if the bank faces any liquidity problem, bank can sell that particular commodity which is going to be received in future for an other parallel Salam contract. So the things to be kept in mind in that, in a parallel Salam contract, time period is shorter than the original Salam contract. So with the reduced time period, price will be higher than the Salam contract. So here the bank will get from the price appreciation, bank will earn some profit, but the bank can sell the assets even before the bank can receive them. So here there is an exception. Otherwise, this will not qualify to be a valid sale contract. And we have the reference from the hadith that at the times of Prophet ﷺ, people were selling their dates even before they were harvested. So even before they were harvested, like 1 or 2 years before they could be harvested. Using the same reference, the Salam transaction is also a valid mode of financing under Islamic financial system. So what is the risk profile of Salam? So here, in the beginning of the contract, cash is paid to the client. For a deferred delivery of the goods, there is a credit risk. You have paid cash and you are not the owner of the asset which you have purchased. So by the time you don't become owner, in the meanwhile, there is a credit risk. Suppose the client doesn't deliver the asset, so in that case, client has to pay back the cash you have paid as a price to the client. And if there are some other mechanisms, like there is a security or there are some penalties, so those penalties will not become part of the bank's income, rather it will be donated for some charitable purpose. And when the goods are due during the transaction period, still there is a credit risk. Like in the beginning there is a credit risk when the payment is made, and during the time period before the delivery of the goods, there is still the credit risk. And when the Islamic financial institution receives the goods, there is market risk. So now, becoming the owner of these goods, Islamic financial institution has to sell the goods. So into the market, whatever risks are there available for that particular asset, now the bank has to face those risks. So there is a market risk for the bank. And when the bank enters into parallel Salam contract with a third party, which is not the related party to these two parties which entered into the first Salam contract, so that third party pays the cash to the bank for that deferred delivery of the goods. Now, the bank has received the cash and there is no risk. But during the transaction period, goods are due. So here, if the bank receives the assets or receives the commodities from the first solemn contract, only then bank can make the payment or bank can deliver the goods to the third party where the bank has entered into a parallel solemn contract. But if the goods are not received from the first contract, then the bank has two arrangements. Either the bank has to purchase the goods from the market and to deliver it to the third party, or the bank might go default. So in that case, the bank has a credit risk. So that risk will remain there till the time period that goods are received by the bank and they are delivered to the third party. And if the bank receives the goods which were due from the first contract and then bank delivers, the Islamic financial institution delivers the goods to the third party, then there is no risk. So that market risk is also diminished automatically. Now let's discuss the risk profile of istisna mode of financing. And before we go to the risk profile, let me remind you what is istisna mode of financing. It's again a pre-production of sale, a sale of the asset which has not yet been produced, just like in the case of solemn contract. So a pre-production sale used when an item or asset needs to be manufactured or constructed. So an asset is required by the client or maybe any entity. So in that case, if the buyer or the client enters into a istisna contract with the Islamic financial institution for the construction of that particular asset, so there is an istisna contract. The price of the asset or the goods should be known and time of payment can be negotiated among the parties. In case of salam, time of delivery of the goods is fixed. But in case of istisna, it is not fixed for a particular date, but a particular, maybe a season or a month can be mentioned that the goods should be delivered in the month of December or maybe at the end of December, but a particular date is not fixed in case of istisna. And the seller of the goods, which is normally a bank, can either manufacture it or subcontract it in the form of parallel istisna. So in case of parallel salam, the bank could sell the commodities and could receive the cash at the spot, and after delivery of the commodities, bank could deliver the commodities to the third party. But in case of parallel istisna, the nature is different here. When bank enters into an istisna contract with the client for the construction of a particular asset, so in that case, bank itself is a financial institution. Bank has no experience for the construction, or maybe if the contract is for the construction of a warehouse, bank is not an expert into it. So the bank might hire the services of the professionals and will construct the building by its own resources, or bank may enter into a subcontract with any professional who will construct that asset on behalf of the bank. So that will be the second contract and it will be known as parallel istisna. So in first contract, bank assumes the responsibility to construct the asset. So now the bank can construct the asset by itself, or bank can enter into a subcontract with the professional who will construct that asset on behalf of the bank. And however, the bank is liable for the delivery of the goods or the asset. For the first contract, which is an istisna contract, in any case, bank has to honor the commitment and bank has to deliver the goods. Bank has to deliver the required goods which are mentioned into the contract. And the price of istisna can be paid lump sum at once, or it can be tied up with the stages of completion or with the stages of manufacture of that particular asset. When the asset has been completed 50%, maybe 50% of the price is released, and when the asset is completed 100%, and then maybe 100% price is paid. So in this case, the risk profile will be like this. In case of first contract of istisna, in the beginning, Islamic financial institution commits to manufacture the asset. At that moment, there is no market risk, there is no credit risk. And the risk will start only when the resources are committed, when the raw materials are committed into the manufacture of that asset, and when that production of that asset, when the manufacturing of that asset has started, at that time the risk would start. Before that, both of the parties, they have the right to unilaterally cancel the contract. And then during the transaction period, when the asset is being constructed, the cost is being incurred, and being the owner of that asset during the production time period, there is a market risk, and at the same time, bank is consuming its assets, maybe cash and other assets. So at that time, cash is also committed, and that cash actually is due from the buyer. So there is a credit risk as well at the same time. And when that construction is completed and the asset is delivered to the buyer, and the Islamic financial institution receives the price, then there is no risk. Cash is received, asset is delivered. The risk eliminated. And then in case of parallel istisna, when the Islamic financial institution, after entering into a contract to construct something or to manufacture something, enters into a contract with the other party as a subcontract to construct the same asset which is the subject of istisna. So in that case, Islamic financial institution commits to manufacturer of the asset to make the payments at some time, maybe lump sum or with the completion of that, with the stages of completion of that asset. So there is a subcontract, and that is known as parallel salam. So in this contract, when the bank pays a part of the price, now the bank has committed its resources, maybe the cash resources, so there is the credit risk. And then at the end, when the assets should have been completed, when the manufacturing should have been completed, and it is completed in a way which was not according to the first contract, that was contract of istisna. Maybe there are defects into the production, maybe it doesn't qualify in its specifications mentioned into the master contract. So in that case, there is a counterparty risk. So that counterparty risk is in the form of that subcontractor, which is supposed to supply the goods in the parallel istisna contract to the bank, and then bank would be able to supply those commodities to the purchaser or to the client. So here we have the counterparty risk. And then seller delivers the asset. When the assets they are manufactured in the parallel istisna contract, they are delivered to the Islamic financial institution, and Islamic financial institution delivers the assets as a seller to the buyer and receives cash price for that, then there is no risk. And if in case of any default or any defect into the manufactured goods or any defects into the specifications of those goods, the risk would materialize. And the risk profile of istisna is a little complex than the other risk profiles. And now we'll discuss mudarba. And let me refresh the concept of mudarba. It is a form of partnership where one party supplies the capital and the other party supplies the managerial skills. The other party is known as mudarib, or the entrepreneur or the manager, and the supplier of capital is known as the Rabbul Mal, or supplier of capital. And the profits are shared among the partners in an agreed upon ratio, which may not be according to the capital contribution, because in this case, one party is providing the monetary resources, the other party is providing the human resources. So both of these resources, they will have their share in the profits. And otherwise, if we look only at the monetary resources, they come 100% from one party. So here the profit sharing ratio may be 50%, maybe 40 to 60, or any ratio is possible. And the financier cannot ask for a guarantee of capital or the return. So in this contract, the Rabbul Mal, which is the capital provider, cannot claim any guarantee for the protection of their capital or fixation of the return. this guarantees cannot be provided by any of the parties, but this has been mentioned in the contract that third parties can provide such guarantees which are not related to both of these parties. And governments, in some cases, to encourage the entrepreneurial activities, may provide such guarantees that in case of loss, government will compensate those losses. Government might compensate those capital losses. And mudarba can be restricted and unrestricted. If it is a restricted mudarba, the capital provider may restrict the businesses maybe to a certain geography. For example, the business will only be carried out in Lahore and it will only be carried out in the IT industry and for such and such commodities. So this will be a restricted mudarba. But if it is an unrestricted mudarba, it means the mudarib has the right to operate wherever he or she wants and to engage in any business activities. And of course, all the business activities should be Sharia compliant. The core business activities must qualify to become a Sharia compliant activities. And in case of musharaka, now musharaka and mudarba, they have similar kind of risk profile. So we will mention collectively for musharaka and mudarba. So musharaka is a partnership contract in which all partners, they contribute their capital. And they contribute their capital maybe in monetary terms, maybe in some commodities, but their values will be determined in some one common currency, and that will be mentioned into the contract, and that currency will remain throughout the contract period as a standard currency. Musharaka is just like mudarba, but in case of mudarba, only mudarib operates the activities, the business operations, but here in case of musharaka, all the partners, they can manage the project. They all are the active partners. They can assume the role of an agent on behalf of the partnership, and they might enter into an arrangement where they assign the duty of management to one of the partners or two of the partners, or maybe they hire managers to conduct the business activities for that musharaka activity. And the profits are shared among the partners at an agreed upon ratio, but losses by all the partners according to the capital contribution. So these lines I have repeated many times, that profits can be shared at any agreed upon ratio, whereas losses will be shared according to the capital contribution. So this is the risk profile of musharaka and mudarba. In case of mudarba, Islamic financial institution invests into the business, and buys non-voting shares. So in this case, there is a difference in mudarba and musharaka. In case of mudarba, mudarib, the manager or the entrepreneur, is fully independent in its decisions. Whatever decision the mudarib takes, he has full capacity to go for the decisions. But in case of musharaka, Islamic financial institution invests into a musharaka contract and has the voting rights, can have the say into the operations of that project. And in case of diminishing musharaka, which is also an extension of musharaka, Islamic financial institution invests and purchases the voting rights into the contract. Whereas only mudarba contract doesn't give any voting right, doesn't give any say to the Islamic financial institution as a Rabbul Mal into the operations of the business. But the Islamic financial institution as a Rabbul Mal can monitor the operations of the business and can make sure that the business is operated according to the agreement. It is operated as per the Sharia lines, and all the activities are Sharia compliant. Such type of compliances the bank can make sure, and they can have the monetary role. And during the transaction period, the profits from the investments, they are due, and the managers, that is mudarib, has to deliver the profits to the Rabbul Mal. So the share of profit, which is the share of the Rabbul Mal, should be paid to the Rabbul Mal, and this is a credit risk. So the mudarib may not pay it on time, or even the mudarib may not pay the share of the capital provider. So there is a counterparty risk as well. And in case of musharaka, the profit share or the return is due. Again, it's the counterparty risk that the manager of that business venture, manager of that musharaka, may not pay, may go default, and this is a counterparty risk in this case as well. And also in case of diminishing musharaka, profit share or the return are due, and it all depends upon the operating partner, so there is a counterparty risk. And when at the end of the mudarba contract, when the objective has been achieved, with the specific time period for which the mudarba contract was signed, it has expired. So at that time, all the assets of that mudarba will be liquidated, and the share of the capital provider will be paid to him, and the profits will be shared according to the agreed upon ratio. So in that case, the principal amount which is due, if it is in cash, it is received, there is no risk. And if it is received in the form of equity or maybe in the form of some capital assets, then there is market risk. So if some shares or some stocks of a company are received by the capital provider as his or her share, so in that case, the capital provider has to sell those assets to realize or to liquidate those assets. So in that case, market risk is always there. And similarly, in case of musharaka, principal amount that is due, if it is received in cash, there is no risk, and if it is received in the form of equity, then there is a market risk. And in the case of diminishing musharaka, asset or equity is transferred to the other partner. The bank, as the capital provider or the capital contributor in case of diminishing musharaka, receives or sells his shares, his units of ownership to the other partner over the contract period, and at the end, when 100% ownership goes to the client, at that time asset is transferred to the client, and for the bank there is no risk. So in the case of diminishing musharaka, at the end asset is transferred and there is no risk. Now we have identified certain risks in the beginning, during the transaction, or at the end of the transaction. And now how to mitigate these kind of risks, how to avoid such risks, how to manage all these risks. As we mentioned earlier, that risks in the Islamic financial instruments, they are complex, they are different at different stages. So it is quite challenging to manage such type of risks. And it is important to know the underlying features of the contract and risks arising in different modes of financing. And the risk management would require knowledge of Islamic contracts and also the appropriate skills to mitigate risks arising in them. So at each level, there may be a credit risk. It should be handled according to the nature of the contract. And if it is a market risk at any stage of the contract, it should be handled carefully by the operators or by the Islamic financial institutions. So as an example, let me discuss the features of the Murabha contract, the risks at different levels, and how to mitigate those risks in case of Murabha contract. So as we know all, Murabha is a sale contract, and the seller reveals the actual price of the asset being sold and indicates the profit in lump sum or any costs which are associated with that type of asset. And delivery of the asset is at the spot. Payments can be at the spot or deferred, but normally the payments are deferred and are received in installments. And it's a sale with spot delivery and deferred payment. So this is, if in case of financial Murabha, what we know as Murabha, we may call it as a financial Murabha as well. And the other type of Murabha is known as operating Murabha. And in that case, the payments for the asset, they are paid at the spot, but there is no financing required by the client. So that's why we call it as an operating Murabha. But in case of financial Murabha, the asset is sold for the deferred delivery of the price. So in the financial Murabha has the following elements into it, that is promise agreement. As we discussed in the Murabha lecture, that at different phases, the client and the bank, they have different documentations required, different promises required. So at the first step, the promise agreement is between the bank and the client that the bank and client sign an overall agreement of the promise to buy or sell, what we call as master murabha agreement. And then there is an agency agreement. The bank appoints the agent as an agent, and an agency agreement takes place. Now the client, on behalf of the bank, will purchase the asset, and purchase of the goods from the supplier. The client will purchase the goods and takes possession as an agent, and offer for purchase. Now when the goods have been purchased by the client, it becomes the ownership of the bank, because client is only an agent, the bank is the owner of the asset. Now there is an offer of purchase to the client, and there is an acceptance of the offer. The ownership of the asset at that time is transferred to the client, and a debt is created against the client, and the client is going to pay maybe in installments or in different phases. And the points to be noted here are: the commodity cannot be bought from the client. This will make the issue of buyback agreement. Just like in case of Ijara Skooks, we discussed that with the Skook funds which are created by the SPV, the originator sells the asset and then lease it back. So here in case of Murabha, the asset cannot be purchased from the client to resell it again. So it will constitute a buyback agreement, which is not permitted by the Sharia scholars, and it is not allowed in the Islamic financial system. And if the bank purchases, the agency contract not needed. So if bank itself purchases the asset, agency contract is not required. In such cases, two separate contracts for supplier and buyer, and the purchase has to be before sale. And there are two separate contracts in case the bank itself purchases the asset for the client. That is one contract between the bank and the seller of the asset, and then the other contract between the bank and the purchaser of the asset, that is the client. And the bills of trade resulting from transaction can be transferred at face value only, because it's a debt agreement, and the bank has a document which represents a claim against that debt. So if the bank wants to sell that debt agreement, like we discount the bills receivable, so that agreement can only be sold at its face value as per the value of the debt mentioned into that agreement. And what are the risks in financial murabha? There are pre-sale risk and there are post-sale risks. So in the pre-sale risk, loss or damage of the good before delivery. When the bank purchases the asset for the client before its delivery, pre-sale risk is that when it is not sold to the client, now the bank is the owner of that asset and bank has the possession of that asset, any loss or any damage can happen. So in that case, this is a pre-sale risk. So refusal of the buyer to take the delivery. The second risk is that bank has purchased the asset for the client and it was not a binding murabha, what we know as a non-binding murabha. So here, if the bank refuses to take the delivery of that asset, we have a market risk for the bank. And in that case, bank has to sell the asset in the market to realize its price. And there is high probability that the cost bank has paid may not be recovered if the bank sells that particular asset which was refused by the client, and there is a risk of loss. And then there are post-sale risk. In the post-sale risk, there might be found some defects into the asset. The asset which is purchased by the bank and it is delivered to the client. Client purchases the asset, but client finds some defects into it, and it will make the contract invalid. It will cancel the contract, and the asset will be returned to the bank. Then the bank might have to face some huge losses. And if there are no defects and the client purchases the asset, then the price is due from the client. Then there is settlement risk. There is a credit risk. And then there is a market benchmark risk. How much profit should be charged? So these are different risks in the pre-sale and in the post-sale. So how do we mitigate these risks? So in the first step, as a pre-sale risk, the loss or damage of goods before delivery. When the bank purchases the asset and it is in the possession of the bank, now there is a probability or there is a risk of loss or damage to that asset. So before delivery, the goods in bank's responsibility and risk can be mitigated in this way. One is minimizing the period of holding. That is, bank purchases the asset and right away delivers it to the client. That time period can be minimized, so the risk will be minimized. And if time is longer, insurance can be bought. For example, bank has purchased the asset, but the client will take the delivery, suppose after 1 month. So in that case, for this 1 month, the bank should have the insurance arrangement for that particular asset. And at the second stage, if in case of refusal of the buyer to take the delivery, the bank is left with the good. Such risk can be minimized. Now, the bank has purchased the asset, but the client refused to take the delivery. So there is a risk of a market risk in this case, but this risk can be avoided by the bank, that the bank purchases the goods with a right to return it within a specific time period. So when bank purchases the asset from the vendor, so the bank enters into a contract with the vendor that if during maybe 3, 4 or 7 days the asset is not delivered to the client, then the bank will return the asset to the vendor and the vendor may charge a nominal fee for that. And the bank sells the good and client pays the difference between cost and sale price. Then the bank can make it binding to the client that in case of default or in case of refusal to take delivery, any loss will be recovered from the client because it was resulted because of the negligence or because of the mistake of the client. So that loss can be compensated from the client. And in this case, the clause that can be made part of the agreement, we have the example for that. We can quote such type of clauses, we can enter such type of clauses to avoid such kind of risk. So let me read it out for you. If for any reason whatsoever the agent shall refuse or fail to take delivery of the equipment or any part thereof, or shall refuse or fail to conclude the sale arrangement or sale agreement, the bank shall have the right to take delivery or cause delivery to be taken of the equipment and shall have the right to sell or cause the sale of the equipment, but without obligation on its part to do so in a manner determined by it at its sole discretion, and shall have the right to take whatever step is deemed necessary to recover the difference between the price realized upon sale and the price paid by the bank plus any other expenses incurred in its relation to the equipment. Now this clause can be entered into the agreement that if the buyer refuses to take delivery, then the bank will dispose of the asset, bank will sell the asset by whatever means it can, and any of the losses will be recovered from the client. And the third pre-sale risk is that market price risk. Now if the asset is purchased by the bank, client refused to take the delivery, now there is a market risk. So how the bank can avoid that market risk? That is the risk the price will be lower in case the bank would sell the asset in the market again. So risk of changes in price prior to delivery of good to the client, such risk can be mitigated, minimizing the holding time by selling immediately after buying. If the client refuses to purchase the asset, then the bank should not leave the asset at its place. Bank should readily or immediately sell that asset, such that if the time period goes longer, there is a risk that the price of that particular asset may fall. So in that case, the losses can be huge, and that can be avoided by immediately selling the asset. And in case of post-sale risk mitigation, there are certain risks what we mentioned in the post-sale, that latent defects in the goods. The bank purchased the asset is delivered to the client, and the client found that there are some risks, there are some defects. So it is possible that goods supplied by the supplier is defective. The risk can be minimized by transferring the liability to the vendor or the supplier through warranty. So in this case, warranty can be demanded from the supplier, and this kind of risk will be avoided if the warranty is there. If any loss, any damage is there, any defect is found in the product, that can be recovered from the supplier. And the example is that in the agreement the example of clause in the agreement would state like that: if a latent defect is discovered in the equipment, the vendor undertakes to assign to the purchaser the benefit of any guarantee, condition of warranty relating to the equipment which may have been given to the vendor by the supplier and which has been examined and accepted by the purchaser, and all other warranties or guarantees as may be implied by law or recognized by custom in favor of the vendor. In addition to the assignment to the purchaser as herein indicated, the vendor shall take such other action as the purchaser shall reasonably request to enable the purchaser to claim against the supplier. So in this case, supplier can be held responsible and the defects can be recovered, or the losses will be recovered when the supplier is held responsible. And the second post-sale risk was the settlement risk. When the asset is purchased by the bank, it is sold to the client for a deferred payment, and in this case there is a settlement risk that the client has to make the payment on time. The risk that the client will not pay his or her dues on time or default, the risk may be minimized. The bank can ask for a guarantee, sign a guarantee agreement. Bank can seek guarantees from credible personalities. And also the bank can ask for a security or a collateral and can sell the collateral if the debtor defaults. So there can be certain securities, and the subject matter of sale can also be one of the securities. And in case of default, the securities can be sold and the losses can be recovered, and can impose penalty for negligence problem. Just to make sure that client will make the payments on time, a penalty clause can be introduced into the agreement that in case of late payments or in case of defaults, such and such amount of penalty will be charged from the client. But do keep in mind again that penalties will not form a part of income of the bank. The penalties will be donated. A separate penalty account might be created, and all the deposits into that account will go to some charitable purpose. An example of such clause in the agreement can be like that: the client hereby undertakes that if he defaults in payment of any of his dues under the agreement, he shall pay to the charitable account or fund maintained by the bank a sum calculated on the basis of percentage per annum for each day of default, unless he establishes through evidence a satisfactory to the bank that his non-payment at the due date was caused due to poverty or some other factors beyond his control. And if that late payment can be justified with some reasonable logic, so the late payment doesn't constitute any misconduct or breach of contract or any negligence, in that case penalty may not be charged. And the third post-sale risk is the market risk or the benchmark risk. The risk that returns of the bank will be affected if the benchmark rate changes. The risk may be minimized by the contracts may be designed for short-term durations. So normally the Islamic financial institutions they take the interest rates, that is London Interbank Offer Rate or the Karachi Interbank Offer Rate, as their benchmark. So if the benchmark changes, the interest rates in the economy they change, it means the benchmark for the Islamic financial institutions would also change. So, and if the change is huge, it has some huge implications. Maybe the returns which are derived out of such transaction, if they are quite lower, the depositors will be getting a lower return, and then there is a risk that depositors might withdraw their deposits from the bank. So in that case, bank might be in a bad shape. So here the solution is that the duration of such kind of contracts can be made smaller. For example, if it is a sale of any asset, So the price should be recovered maybe in 1 year or any time period which is supposed to be a shorter time period, during which the benchmark may not change. So this was the third point in the post-sale risk. So we studied only Murabaha as an example, that what are the risks in the transaction and what are the pre-sale risk and what are the post-sale risk and how the bank can mitigate such kind of risks. And this is all for today. In this lecture, we discussed the risks in Islamic financial instruments. We discussed the risks in different instruments like Musharka, Mudarba, Salam, Istisna, Ijara, and we discussed their risk profiles, that during beginning of the transaction and then during the transaction and at the end of the transaction, what is nature of risk. And we found that there are market risks, there are credit risks, and there are counterparty risks at different stages of these financial instruments. And then we discussed one of the instruments, that is Murabaha, and we identified pre-sale and post-sale risk into that, and we also mentioned some solutions how to mitigate such type of risk. So this was all about our today's lecture. Inshallah, see you in the next lecture. Till then, Assalamu alaikum.